Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from Step by Step Painting, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint Tropical Island Beach with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. Let's go over brushes and colors. So there are three brushes that we'll be using for this: a 3/4 inch flat wash, a number 8 round brush specifically because it has that little point to it for some detail work, and a number 4 round brush. These are the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes. We'll be using 8 colors for this: Mars Black, Titanium White, Cerulean Blue, and Cobalt Blue, so you'll need those 2 different blues for this. Quinacridone Magenta only shows up in the starfish. Phthalo Green, Cadmium Yellow Light Hue shows up in the sun and some of the palm tree, and raw Sienna to help us make the sand color. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'll be doing this on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. You also need a pencil and straight edge. And the first thing we're going to do is lay our canvas in a horizontal position and locate the center. So we're going to be drawing the horizon line across the canvas. So if you're working on 11 by 14, you'll want to mark 5.5, which is the center mark, and then do a horizontal line using a T-square or a straight edge all the way across the canvas. You'll want to adjust that line if you're using a different canvas. So the horizon line in this painting is exactly in the center. We're going to start by painting the sky first, and let's load our palette with Cerulean Blue and Titanium White. We'll also be using a 3/4 inch flat wash brush. So the technique for the sky in this painting includes paint strokes that are going in a diagonal direction. You're welcome to change that to make the direction go a different way or kind of just all over or horizontal, but I decided to change things up a bit and go diagonally for this entire sky. So with this sky, let's do blue and white mixed together. So I have blue and white about equal amounts, both loaded on my paintbrush. I like to just double load the color and let that blend onto the canvas. Our blue and white will blend gently together. And again, I'm going in a diagonal direction. If you want, you can go horizontally or vertically or go all different directions depending on what style you're going for. Let's try to make our sky a little bit darker towards the top of the sky and a little bit lighter as we get to the bottom horizon line area. So that means as we work our way down, we're going to add a little bit more white to our brush to kind of lighten this blue up. So basically everything above that horizontal line is painted with this blue and white combination. If this video is going too fast for you, you can always press pause to catch up. So down here, I'm going to make sure I add a little bit more white to my brush, blend that up into the upper part of the sky. So I did kind of the first upper 2/3 of the sky, and now I'm just doing the bottom kind of third of the sky. So more white on my palette. This white will gently blend with the blue to make a lighter blue. If you find your colors drying too fast, you can always just add a teeny bit of water to your brush. Helps to spread that paint a little bit further. And your sky does not have to be blended all the way. If there's some darker streaks of color in there that aren't blended, or lighter streaks of color in there that aren't blended, that's okay. And also, it's okay if you went over your horizon line because we'll be painting our ocean color over that anyway, just as long as you can still see your horizontal line. When you're done with the sky, you do not have to wait for this layer to dry. We are going to load a different blue onto our palette. We are going to be using Cobalt Blue. And before we load that Cobalt Blue, let's draw our shoreline. So in the perspective of this painting shows the shore in kind of the lower left corner area of the painting, and our waves are just kind of gently coming in towards the bottom. And there's going to be an island and a bundle of shrubbery and palm trees in the upper left. So you want to just kind of draw this curved line that dips down very quickly from the upper left, and then we have a little bit of space towards the right. So we kind of divide that up. So everything on the right of that line is going to be ocean. Everything on the left is going to be our sand. And then load your palette with the Cobalt Blue and rinse your 3/4 flat brush off. And let's take our Cobalt Blue and just kind of define our horizon line again. So I can still see that horizontal line. Just little bits of that blue on the tip of the brush, and you're outlining that line. It doesn't have to be perfect. If it dips up a little bit, that's okay. There's going to be an island that's going to be above that line over on the right. So right here we have a very thin area of water, then it quickly dips down and curves and just kind of hits the bottom right edge of the canvas. It doesn't go all the way to the corner though. So on the lower part of the ocean, we want this to be lighter. The waves are going to be kind of coming in over here, so the water's not going to be dark and deep over here. So load a whole bunch of white on your brush. Let's load some more Cerulean Blue in here. So I like how this Cerulean Blue mixes with the Cobalt Blue. So we can take some of this Cerulean Blue, bring it up in the middle, grab our Cobalt, bring our Cobalt down into that lighter blue. So again, we want this to be darker in the distance where it's kind of deeper ocean, and then using that other blue that we used for the sky and then our white to kind of blend that in so it kind of blends into a lighter blue towards the bottom. Now as we paint the wave area, our direction of the stroke, we can change that, so we can curve this with this lighter color this way, but we still want our ocean wave direction, our ocean water direction, to still go horizontal as it meets that curved line. So we can paint the curved line towards the edge and then go back and do horizontal strokes towards the curved part. Now you want to try not to blend your color all the way. So we don't want this all to be the same color. We still want it to be darker, that dark cobalt blue in the background. That blends to our lighter blue down here. See how this kind of curves and then it meets horizontally. Add a little bit more white towards the shoreline back here. And so I'm just going back and making sure all those edges or the direction of the paint strokes are all going horizontally over there. A little bit more white down here. And it's okay if that line that we outlined at the shoreline, that's that dark blue still showing, that's fine. Let's make our sand color next. So we have raw sienna and cadmium yellow light on our palette. We have a 3/4 flat, and I am going to mix equal parts of the raw sienna, the yellow, and the white, and it's going to make this pretty kind of light golden brown color. So our sand is going to be darker in the lower left area, and it's going to be lighter as it kind of approaches the shore. So I'm going to start painting this, still using the 3/4 flat wash brush, doing left and right strokes. So I started on the lower left corner, horizontal paint strokes with our darker color, and then stop and introduce more titanium white in there and blend that with our white. So that white is going to really lighten that sand color. So we want to bring this all the way to the water. We're going to have our seafoam overlap this sand here in a later step, but we have to make sure it's sand color, not blank canvas when we do that. So again, that's that sand color, but added more white to it. And we want to kind of do the same thing like what we did with the ocean. We want to make sure our sand paint strokes are going horizontally, but we can still kind of outline the edge of that in a curved direction and then go back and do horizontal paint strokes. So I'm just kind of doing some color variation in the sand here. So I have a little bit more of my darker color and I'm letting that blend, grabbing a little bit more white and just kind of letting that blend. So it's kind of got a nice variation, but The closer you are to the ocean water, let's make that lighter. If some of your brown accidentally starts mixing with some of the blue in the ocean, that's okay. You just don't want to spread too much of that into the sand area, but still you want to just get as close as possible so there's no canvas still showing through. So you outline it and just kind of take your white and kind of drag that lighter sand color from the edge of the shore into the rest of the sand. And for now, it's going to look like it's like a little hill on the side of the ocean, but when we add our little palm tree island area and our sea foam, our soft waves, it won't look like that anymore. We're going to paint our little peninsula or island that's off in the distance. Actually, it's not that little of a peninsula, it's kind of a large one, mountainy area. We'll be using the color Phthalo Green and Mars Black. And let's switch to our number 4 round brush. Start by mixing your green and black together. It's just going to make a really, really dark green, and that's okay. We want to start dark, and then we'll highlight this later. But in the very middle of the ocean area, almost exactly to the middle, maybe a little bit more towards the left, start your mountain. And I'm just going to use the end of my brush to draw our big, I keep calling it a little one, our big mountain range or big hill island. So we have 4 peaks and kind of goes off the edge on the right of the canvas. So once you outline the shape of it, just go in and fill it in. Still using kind of the black and the green combination of color. It doesn't have to be consistent, so if some of it looks lighter in some areas or darker in other areas, that's actually okay. But I'm just filling this in, maybe another little peak kind of on the edge. Short paint strokes, kind of angled downwards, going in the direction of the shape of the mountain. So these are angling this way, these are angling this way. Maybe another little peak kind of going up on the right. And then fill all of that in solid, little cross hatching angled paint strokes. And as you approach the bottom, it's okay if this land area goes a little bit below that ocean line. See how I just kind of wiggled my brush a little bit right here to make it look like that's kind of dipping down into our ocean area. So right now, this mountainy area is flat and dark. It has some color variations, but we're going to go and highlight this before this dries, ideally before this dries, so that this can kind of blend wet on wet with that color that's already there. So on your palette, you want to mix without rinsing the brush at all. So there's black and green still on my brush. You want to mix some white into it so you have a lighter tint of this color. So I just twisted my brush in some of that white paint. Let's start over here on the far left. In the center of your peak, draw a line that kind of dips down and then it kind of bends to the left on the left side of that line. So you're basically dividing up each of the peaks into 2 areas, the left side and the right side. So I kind of demonstrate this for you again. So here's a peak, draw a diagonal line, and everything on the left in that diagonal line, you are dragging some of that lighter color on the left, but leaving the right side dark. So it gives the illusion that just the one side of that peak is light, the other side, the right side, is shadowy. So this peak over here, we did a diagonal line, and then on everything on the left side, just dragging this lighter color and letting that kind of fade out. I'm going to drag a little bit more of this lighter color down here. And you can see how it's now starting to give your mountain some depth. So I'm going to get some more white on my palette and do this peak right here. So draw the line down the middle. It angles to the right, and then to the left of that, paint your little paint strokes that drag just on the left side. I'm going to grab some more white on my palette, and I'm going to do a peak right here so we can kind of make one up. So I did like the diagonal line and then dragged my color on the left side of it, but left the right dark, another one on the right too. So this white is blending with my dark green. If it's not blending for you because it maybe dried too fast, you can add more green to your paintbrush while you're doing this white, so it's not super bright white, so it still has that lighter green color. I'm going to go back with another layer, but this time add more white to my brush, and just on the far part of that peak edge, adding a little bit more white right here where that line is that divides it, dragging just a little bit more white, and that gives it that little pop of extra highlight on the mountain, just where that division line is. If we want, we can go in and with our darker color and add maybe these dragged diagonal lines on the right side. So we did the lighter part on the left side. We can go back and add some darker shadowy colors on the right, but it's already darker and shadowy, so you don't have to add more. Doing that just added kind of some more color variation in that area. Next, we're going to do our little palm tree island area. It's not really an island, it's just a bundle of shrubbery growing here where our palm trees are going to live. So let's, without rinsing the brush, grab our phthalo green and black. If there's still some white on our brush, that's okay. We just want to start by making a dark little peninsula area over here in the upper area of the sand, kind of a triangular region. And I just kind of defined the shape first, and I'm going back and stippling my brush to create that texture. We're just trying to kind of define this area. We can always go in and highlight and add more detail later. So there's my dark little triangular region with some textured areas. I'm going to add more phthalo green to my palette, and I'm going to go back and create a lighter green to add on top of this. So use the 4 round brush to mix your cad yellow light color, so your yellow color, with your phthalo green color. Grab a little bit of white in there to lighten it up. And then I added a little raw sienna into that to give it more of this like natural green color. And go in and just dot your brush with this lighter color on your kind of area. We don't want to cover all the dark, we're just kind of highlighting this. So the dark still needs to kind of show in a lot of the areas because for the shadowing, but the lighter color gives it that kind of textured look and dimension. And I brought that area up a little bit higher above the horizon line too. So now we have our little area where our palm trees are going to live, and we're going to mix our palm tree color, next our trunk color. So we're using Mars Black, raw sienna. If you want, you can add a little bit of white to that too, and use our number 4 round brush. I watered this down slightly because I'm going to be doing a thin trunk shape, and I want this to kind of flow and be easier to control. So adding a little bit of water to that brush and kind of twisting the brush your bristles, gets that paint kind of distributed right on the end of the bristles. Our palm tree trunks are thinner at the top and thicker at the bottom. So if it's easier for you to start thick and then release the pressure to go thin, you can do that. Or you can start out very thin and then give more pressure to your trunk. So you want the trunk to be thinner at the top and thicker at the bottom. So I did thin pressure at first. So I started at the top of the trunk and stroked my brush down. And as I worked my way down, I applied more pressure on the bristles to make the trunk a little bit thicker. So warning here, my camera is going to get cut off in this area. But so there's my 3 trunks. They're all kind of angling towards the right. 2 of them are kind of closer together. One's a little bit further away. Maybe they're all relatively the same height. If you want to, you can change the heights of them. So then I'm going to do the center parts of all the palm fronds. And it's basically the same color. If you need to switch to a smaller brush, so if you want to use the 8 round brush that has a nice point to it, you can, or a little tiny detail brush. Basically, I just kind of pinched my bristles to make them kind of forming a very, very thin area that I can paint with. But I am painting the middle part of the palm tree branches, not the leaves, just the middle line, kind of doing this like fanned area of lines that go all the way around the trunk. So this is the part where our camera is going to get cut off a little bit, but I'm essentially doing the same thing to my other 2 palm trees. I'm doing the middle line that is like curving down at the bottom and then curving up at the top to create kind of this fanned area for our palm tree branches. So there you go. Almost like I'm painting firework shapes on the very, very top of our palm tree branches. So it's going to look like that. So there's a middle part of all our palm fronds. And next we're going to make our green that we'll be using for the leaves. So we can kind of have fun and make up our own green because I'm going to use actually a large variety of greens here. So mixing phthalo green with white and yellow, add a little raw sienna into that to kind of gives it that more natural green look when you add that raw sienna in there. And I'm going to use the 4 round at first, but then I'm going to switch to a number 8 round. So here, because my bristles are kind of thick on this, I can keep twisting my brush and really work to create that really thin line. But it's kind of hard to do that with this brush. So I'm basically stroking down, starting on the end of the line, the middle line that we painted, and I'm stroking each of the leaves downwards. So this is the number 8 round brush that I was talking about. It has those really nice thin pointed bristles on the end of the brush, and I can just use that part of the bristle to really get in there and do these fine little lines curve down. So I went back over that with my darker green, give it some more contrast. So what I did there is what I'm pretty much going to do for all the lines of my palm tree. They're all kind of curving down, think kind of gravity. So this one would be these palm fronds, leaves would be going downwards. So this one curving down, or it could be that the wind is blowing that direction. So those palm fronds are all kind of being swayed towards the right. And as you are painting these leaves for the palm trees, think color variation. As I reload my brush, I am grabbing a different kind of combination of green and kind of mixing lighter or darker versions of that green to give it that color variation. So not all of these leaves are exactly the same type of green. So let's do our next palm tree. So start in the center of each of your lines and just dragging your paint color down. So loading different variation of that, mixing that on my palette. I can grab raw sienna or even that darker, just the phthalo green because it's dark. It gives me that darker color. I can go back and load some more color. If you need to, you can add a little bit of water to your brush if it's starting to feel kind of dry. But see how I'm loading that color mostly on the tip of the bristles because I want to use those, the end of the bristles on this brush because it's got that fine point to it. So each of these lines get leaves. This one's going to have to overlap, but that's okay. We can deal with that. I'm going back over some of these with white to kind of highlight some of the palm tree leaves. Gives it that kind of extra shiny look when you go back in with white, but you don't want to kind of cover all of them. Just a few. On the base of these palm trees, I'm just going to go in and kind of do these same kind of lines, but they're just kind of sticking up. That helps to kind of disguise the very bottom of the trunks, helps those to kind of blend in a little bit more. And that's just kind of phthalo green with a little bit of white. Let's rinse our brush. And we are going to start filling in the wave details of this painting. We waited for this step because we needed the sand and all that water to dry, but now that it should be dry by now. If it's not, you may want to kind of wait or dry your painting really quick. Let's go back to our number 4 round brush, and we will be using that 8 round later too because some of these little waves require a lot of detail, thin paint stroke work. But let's start easy. We're going to start in this island way back here, and we're going to assume that there's little waves kind of crashing into the shore. Well, they may not be crashing, they may be soft, gentle waves too. But basically, we're taking our 4 round and our titanium white, and we're just stippling these little tiny areas of wave just along the shore of this island area. Just little dots. And these dots don't go all the way across. There are spots where they're kind of not there, where it's just dark blue instead of little dots. And some of them kind of change and dip down a little bit, and some are kind of larger or smaller. But for the most part, they're hugging that shoreline of that island. And then we're going to take this a step further and start bringing these waves down. So these are the ones that are not hitting the shore yet. They're just kind of close to there, but we see these, and these are in the distance. So we need to paint these so they're very kind of dense, close together, and small and not very stretched apart. And as we add more white water lines down in the middle area of our ocean, they're going to get stretched and wider because they're getting closer, because they're bigger. So the ones that are far away are smaller, closer together areas of waves. In the middle, they're longer and further apart. I'm going to introduce more Cobalt Blue to my palette and do some darker areas in these waves, especially the ones that are kind of coming closer to us in the middle of the ocean area. So this is Cobalt Blue. And without rinsing the brush, I'm going to grab that on my 8-round brush. And in the areas that I did some of those stretched out waves, I'm going to do this just above them. You can also do the darker part below it too. And then also some areas where I didn't do any of the white wave lines yet. So just kind of random areas of darker blue. If you're painting them further in the distance, you got to make them kind of smaller and closer together. Just creating these darker kind of areas in the water. And then taking our white, and so on the bottom of that darker line, I just did this like kind of loose, wavy line. That's with titanium white and without rinsing the brush. So this, and this is the 8-round brush, just very kind of loose. Let's start doing our shore wave that's kind of going over our sand area. So with the 8-round brush and the white, I'm just going to define the end of this wave line, starting at our little tree area, and then it goes to the left and to the right, and it's a very kind of wavy, loose line to define the end of that. And then it kind of goes around our tree peninsula area, kind of disappears behind there. So there's another line right here. This one is going to also kind of overlap our sand area. I'm just using the very tip of this 8-round brush, kind of pressing down on that a little bit, so it's kind of going flat as I'm painting. The end of the bristles are kind of going flat as I'm painting this, kind of dragging that. And just defining this kind of second line of sea foam that's going over clear water that's overlapping our sand in the area where our ocean and sand meet together. Another wavy line. And then in between those two main lines, we're going to do our little water kind of reflection. So this is going to give the illusion that it's clear water hugging the shore. Using the tip of that brush, just loosely do these kind of sporadic kind of webbed lines that reach out between those two main lines, and then there's some loose white lines that kind of go into the ocean area. These lines are very thin. I'm holding my brush very lightly, not pressing hard, not doing thick layers of paint. And then we have a lot of blank blue area here, so we can kind of start doing these loose kind of wavy lines in this area. For these, I'm kind of doing more of this kind of stippled technique with my brush. So using a lot of the end of that brush, but I'm dotting it a little bit more. Gives it a little bit more texture and thickness in that wave. A little bit of blue to my brush. And go in and do some of these blue waves. So the dark blue actually gives some of our waves a little bit of shadow, so I can do that blue underneath and then go back and do the wave over that. So it slightly overlaps that darker blue. That gives it a little bit of shadow. So I can do another one over here. So start with the dark blue. And of course, I'm not rinsing my brush, so that white is going to show up. And then there's my dark blue shadow part. of the wave, and then I go back with the white and over that, kind of dot it, stippling it to create that wave texture that slightly overlaps my dark blue. So the dark blue is that shadow part of the wave. So we can keep going with this, keep adding loose wave lines. This one I kind of just dragged my brush over here, a little bit more stippling, kind of holding my brush at an angle to create that effect, and it's very lightly showing up on the canvas. The waves back there aren't as bright and thick as the ones that are closer down here. And then using the tip of the brush to kind of loosely create some more water texture lines that kind of web and cross each other at different angles. I'm going to do a little bit of shadowing on the shore, the end of the sea foam area on the shore. So without rinsing my brush, I'm grabbing some raw sienna and maybe a little bit of that dark color, some of that dark color from the palm tree trunks. It's a little bit of black in there. And on the very, very end of this, I'm stippling this kind of dark shadowy color, just very right under our sea foam, and that gives that a little bit of shadow. I'm going to next add a little bit of shadowing under our green area where the palm trees are. And so on my palette, I'm just mixing a dark green again with the phthalo green and the raw sienna. And just a little bit on the number 8 round brush, and just kind of dry brushing this underneath that. Not a solid coat of paint. I can see a lot of that sand color below that, but just a little bit of greenery to kind of give it some shadow underneath that area. We're going to do the sun and starfish next. So for the sun, you'll need some cad yellow light, and for the starfish, you'll need some medium magenta. So actually, the medium magenta wasn't listed earlier because the medium magenta might be too light for this. So I am going to put Quinacridone Magenta on here, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So for the starfish, we're going to be using the 8 round brush. And if your sand area over here, so if this shows up, you can use medium magenta and white for like a lighter color starfish. But if it doesn't show up, if there's not enough contrast, then I recommend using the darker magenta. This is the Quinacridone Magenta, the dark magenta. So I'm going to use the Quinacridone Magenta. And if you want to change the color of your starfish to something else, you're welcome to do that too. But just do a basic sort of star shape in the sand area. If you want to, you can add a little bit of white to your brush to give that starfish some color variation. I didn't rinse the brush after trying the medium magenta. Just going back over the points of the starfish. Make sure that the shape is nice and defined. So we can leave it simple without any detail, or we can take our white, we can do little white texture dots just in the center of the starfish. And if you want, you could take this a step further and add some shadow in the sand area under the starfish. Just went back with some Quinacridone Magenta dots to kind of darken some of those dots. And then if you want to do a little bit of shadow in the sand, you can rinse your brush and you can go back with a darker brown. So it needs to be a couple shades darker than the brown in the sand. And I'm just going to take this and on the right side of it, kind of add darker areas of sand. And then I'm going to go back and touch up the edges of the starfish with the magenta. And then I'm going to go back and add some lighter color sand in there with the white and the raw sienna. So this is just white and raw sienna, and I'm just going back. I'm not covering all of that shadow. I'm leaving the shadow that's closest to the edge of the starfish there. And this just helps to give more contrast around the starfish. And I'll just kind of apply it all over. On the edges of our tree trunks, I'm just going to add some lighter colored texture. So I'm just doing like just on the left side of each of the trunks, and this is just the raw sienna and titanium white, and still using the 8 round brush. Little tick marks on the left side. It gives the palm tree trunks a little bit more texture. And we are going to rinse and do our sun. So this is the number 4 round brush. I switched to that brush for a little bit more control. And I'm just going to take my cadmium yellow light mixed with a little bit of white to kind of lighten that yellow up. I'm going to paint like a little circle, and then I'm just going to kind of dry brush the outer part of that circle to make some sun rays, just kind of going in a swirly circular direction around that sun. Very dry brush like. It shouldn't be super bright paint strokes. I'm going to load titanium white onto my palette, and I'm going to grab white and yellow. So this has a lot more white in it, and it's going to show up very, very bright, almost a very, very bright pale yellow color. And I'm just going to do another circle, and you see how using that solid bright white in there versus kind of a dry brush creates a completely different effect than the dry brush around it. So that's the actual sun, and the dry brush lines around going in a circle around it are kind of like the sun, glowing part of the sun. And then we can take this a step further and actually paint some sun rays. So you got to do this before this dries, and make sure there's like barely any paint on your brush at the time you're doing this, and just take that middle part that we painted and drag your lines outwards. It's going to take that paint that's on that bright circle we painted, and it's going to smear it outwards to create this effect that the sun has, the sun rays, and they're just going to be kind of dry brush lines. And you can do several of these. They don't have to be evenly spaced apart. They don't have to all be the same length. You can kind of change that up a bit with each of these rays, and you're just dragging your brush outwards. We are messing that circle up, but that's okay. We can go back and repaint that bright sun in the center. So we can take our yellow and our white again in the very center and make sure our bristles are gathered together there, and do our circle again. And that'll create our bright glowing sun in the very, very center of that circle. So now we have kind of a realistic looking sun in our sky. And let's do some yellow reflection lines in the water. We won't go crazy with these, but just under where the sun is. And this is the 8 round brush. I'm taking my yellows, my cad yellow lights with a little bit of white also, and just doing these little lines that start kind of just below the sun. And these lines get wider and further apart as we go down to where the ocean wave lines are. And then I'm going to do a little sparkle in the water, just a few. You can do more if you want, but I'm just using the very, very tip of the 8 round brush to create little diagonal sparkle lines. And I'm going to do a few little yellow lines on the tree just to make it look like maybe the sun is kind of reflecting off of the tops of those palm trees. I'm going to do a little bit more green in there too. So green and yellow, just some lighter colors up here. And then likewise, I want to use some of this light greenish yellow color just to add a little bit of kind of brighter, lighter color in our mountain area that's in the distance. So with the 4-round brush, and you can also do this with the 8-round, it doesn't matter. I'm just going back with my phthalo green and little touch of white and yellow. I don't want to make this too bright because I like how dark this range is, but just a little pop of like bright yellowish color, yellow-green color on the left side of our peaks. Gives that little extra glow from the sun. Some other touch-ups I'm going to do to this painting include going back and touching up my starfish again. So I'm using the 8-round and the Quinacridone Magenta, and I'm just going and outlining the edges of the starfish. And then going back with more little white dots. And I want to add a few more lighter green sort of grass lines in our palm tree area. So this is yellow with the phthalo green, a little bit of white, and the 8-round brush, using the tip of the brush, and I'm just kind of dragging some lighter colors upwards. And the last sort of final touch-up I'm going to do is add some Mars Black to my palette and use the 8-round. I'm going to do lines in the center. I know we did lines earlier on these, but I'm just going to add a few very thin kind of center lines on these palm fronds. And maybe a few kind of lines hanging downwards. And then a little bit of loose black lines on the right side and bottom side of some of the edges of the starfish. And I'm also going to take the black and do, not on the bottom of all of this wave, but just a few kind of darker shadow lines on the edges of some of these waves. And I'm going to sign my pen. I've been using Posca paint pens to sign my name on my paintings lately. You can just use a regular paintbrush in black paint or whatever color paint you want. Sign your name, show it off, and that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Tropical Beach Island. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.